All right, I'm back and I haven't changed my outfit. So we're going to do new taxes, and from my experience, the this is all repeat from last year, and the teachers last year did a very good job teaching you guys about new taxes. Um, we established last time that the French and Indian War did two things. Number one, it gave George Washington the ability to become a leader and start to understand advanced military tactics. And number two, it drove the British deeply into debt. It wasn't just the French and Indian War. Monarchs really weren't great at spending money either. They're kind of like Congress. And the 7 Years' War was raging in Europe at the time, too. Stuff just keeps popping. I thought I shut that off and fixed that, but I guess not. All right. So the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act are probably the two most famous taxes that were put on the colonists, and they're pretty important. They're really common sense. The hardest part about all of this for eighth graders is this idea of smuggling. Um, Smuggling was like taking candy into the movie theater from your house and not buying it at the concession stand. Um, you know, Back in the 90s where we wore really big pants, and I'm dating myself, but you could fit like, a CD player in your pockets, and, three Twixes and a fruit roll up. But anyway, they were smuggling goods all the way around the country, and when they or the colonies, and when they were doing that, um, this ticked off the British because they couldn't tax those goods. Uh, and this comes back later. Boycott, you guys understood pretty well. Boycotting means that you just basically organize a way to not pay for the things or not buy the things that the British thought you should buy. So they just didn't buy stamps, or they didn't buy sugar. This is boycotting. All right. The writs of assistance is super important. The writs of assistance are documents that allowed British officers to search almost anyone, anywhere in the colonies. And this is where we get our Fourth Amendment from. But it was part of the Townshend Acts. But I don't love getting real deep into all these acts because there's too many of them, and it's really hard to keep them straight. But the writs of assistance is incredibly important. This is very much outside of taxing, the writs of assistance, searching people of their private property, is something that during this era would have really made a lot of people mad, and it did. They would just stop people in the middle of the street for nothing and search them, and colonists weren't having it. In 1773, Great Britain passes the Tea Act, and the Tea Act is really misunderstood. The Tea Act is misunderstood because it's not 100% a tax on tea. It's a tax on everybody else's tea. And this is mercantilism at its finest. Great Britain, let's say that there's the China Tea Company. They raise the tax on the Chinese tea, and they don't raise the tax on their tea, the East India Tea Company. And it causes the Chinese tea to double in price and keep the East India Tea Company keep that lower in price. Naturally is going to increase your exports, and it's also going to hurt the Chinese or whoever, the French or whoever else was making tea. This is another example of mercantilism and that constant conflict with mercantilism. All right, the Boston Tea Party, you guys all understand. They dressed up like Native Americans, and they dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. A first grader understands this. The reaction, though, is the coercive/intolerable acts. They are known as the coercive acts in England and the intolerable acts in the colonies. I get those mixed up all the time. They're basically designed to punish Boston for the Tea Party, and British troops take over the city of Boston. This is just an interesting story. During the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty took exceptional care to only damage the property of the East India Tea Company. In fact, the only other thing damaged during the entire protest was a padlock, which was replaced the next day. So it was a riot, and they did get a little squirrely, but they also were very careful to not destroy property that was not part of the East India Tea Company. So it's pretty interesting. All right. So the other part about this that's interesting was this was the tea that was dumped into the Boston Harbor. This is how it would have looked. In the 1700s, tea was compressed into planks. A plank this size could last a person roughly a year. They would be bought in sections and small slivers. They would be bought in sections, and small slivers would be shaved off the kettle every time somebody wanted to make a cup of tea. So what you're telling me is that they were frisbeeing tea off the ships. Yes. And that's what made this such a big deal. They literally destroyed a couple decades worth of tea with each crate that they tossed. They dumped 46 tons of this stuff into the Boston Harbor, or $1.7 million. So that's why it was such a big deal. They literally dumped, in today's cash, $1.7 million worth of tea into the Boston Harbor. All right, that's it for video number 2. If I can figure out how to stop this thing.